Good morning. This is Andrew. I'll be doing this podcast by myself today. Jen is off enjoying the beautiful spring weather that we're having here in Atlanta with her family. Her children are on spring break, and so I hope she's out doing stuff that she loves with the people that she loves. I hope to have her back next week and we can continue our conversation. Just wanted to share a couple things that happened to me this morning. As we know through some episodes here on the podcast, I enjoy hiking. I am not enjoyable to hike with, and I'll be the first one to admit that. I like to move very quickly. It's kind of a moving meditation for me. In the morning when I wake up, one of the first things I'd like to do is sit in a calm, still, meditative state. I find it a way to kind of deconstruct my thoughts. And then I wake up, eat a little bit, and then head out into the woods, where it's a much more active, moving meditation where I'm kind of attempting to reassemble my thoughts. And if anyone's ever gone with me on a hike like that, it's not that fun. I'll be honest with you, because I move at a pretty quick pace, and I'm not much of a talker during that time. But I find it very important to me to kind of bring my thoughts together for whatever I'm working on, whether it be an episode of a podcast or something that I'm writing, or maybe a class that I'm teaching or some other work that I'm considering doing. So this morning, I'm getting myself ready for a hike, and I said, well, I'm going to try some new gear. So different combination of shoes and socks, and I put on some compression sleeves on my ankles, and I got out into the woods, and immediately my ankles started to hurt. And I was like, oh, well, it's just the combination of the shoes or something like that. So I continued to walk, and it became really unbearable. That pain in my shins was difficult to continue walking. Every time I stepped forward, it was painful. And then I started to think, well, maybe it was the massage I had yesterday. Maybe that person, activated something else, or maybe, I need to replace my shoes, or, I was so caught up in what if and why and all of these things and the discomfort of it all that I was just struggling. And so then I tried to connect with some breathing techniques to calm myself down, but keep moving. And I was really upset because I wasn't moving as fast as I like to move. And I had some unrealistic goal in my mind where I need to be able to get 5 miles done within 55 minutes at a walking pace. And that wasn't happening. And so I kept stopping and trying to stretch those areas out. And I was in a lot of pain and kept walking. And I just noticed myself looking down at the trail and not looking forward and not being in the moment. I was so caught up in the discomfort in my physical body that I was not giving myself the opportunity to be present. So I told myself, well, I'm going to get to this one spot near the river. And once I'm there, I'm going to, take off my gear and try to find a more comfortable way so I can make my way back. And I struggled to that point. I got to the river, and finally, I took my shoes off, took the compression sleeves off my ankles, and put my shoes back on, retied them, and just kind of kneeled down at the river and took a minute to breathe. And in that moment, I realized that I was surrounded by a family of deer on both sides of the trail. And they were watching me, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that there was probably about 17 of them that had come down from wherever they were lowing the night before down to the river, I assumed, to have a drink in the morning. And it's just a myriad of age groups there. There was one buck and a doe and her family, and they were sitting there watching me. And it was that in that moment that I realized that, I needed to be more present. Because if I was so caught up in the pain, the discomfort of the walk to get there, what was I missing in the journey? And fortunately, the universe and my body told me to slow down, stop doing this to yourself, and it put me in this position where I got to enjoy the beauty of these animals right there in front of me. And so I sat there for a long time and just watched them as they watched me. And it was a really pleasurable and enlightening experience for me this morning to enjoy that. And on the way back, I was in no discomfort. I was much more present. I was like thinking, okay, look around. What's going on around you? Stop thinking about the discomfort in your body or what else is going on in your life, and give yourself the opportunity to be in this moment. And on the way out, I was much happier. So I learned something today. Hopefully that will help you learn something about yourself today. You're listening to the podcast No Expectations, where we discuss all things spiritual. My name's Andrew, a lifelong Zen Bodhisattva, recovering yogi, yoga instructor, and author. And I'm here with my friend and student, Jen.
I'm a busy mom, a cyclist. I love to spend time in nature and on my mountain bike, and a yogi. I've been asking myself bigger questions about being on a spiritual path, and I've been asking Andrew a lot of bigger questions about this journey. And we invite you to join us on it. Maybe we'll make you laugh, maybe we won't. No expectations.
I wrote about this pretty extensively in a blog post on our website, noexpectations.me. If you haven't been up to our website, I invite you to come visit it. We've got lots of interesting blog posts about spirituality, ways to live sustainably, clean living, way to cleanse your body, way to take care of yourself. And in a post that I wrote recently about the freedom from bondage of the human condition, I was discussing the Kleshas, the limitations or the obstacles that are presented to us on our journey through life, whether that be spiritual or we're just trying to rediscover ourselves or connect with ourselves. The human condition is characterized by a sense of limitation and bondage. A lot of us feel trapped by our circumstances, emotions, beliefs, leading us to a sense of kind of spiritual or personal imprisonment, right? Like, I don't like my job or I don't like my relationship, and so I feel stuck. But there is a way to kind of break those bonds from a spiritual standpoint, by cultivating awareness and seeking to understand who we really are and our place in reality, in the universe. So the term klesha is defined simply as poison or to afflict. And it seems very appropriate once we get into this. The word poison seems very applicable here. Patanjali talked about Kleshas in his Yoga Sutras and how they limit our ability to continue our journey. We spend a lot of time as yoga instructors and teachers and spiritual people talking about yamas and niyamas. This is different. While we have to have that adult relationship with the world around us and people that inhabit that world and ourselves, these 5 kleshas that we want to talk about today are even things that we need to identify as roadblocks that we can find a way around to overcome and work on our way to becoming more enlightened. So we think about the first one is ignorance. And ignorance can mean anything to anyone. I think from a spiritual standpoint, we're thinking about ignorance as it connects to the universe, and as we sometimes deny the fact that the universe is interconnected, that this is like this because that is like that. Ignorance can also arise by just kind of wrongful thinking or being concrete in your thoughts, feeling like you already know the answers or you already have it all figured out, and you're not opening yourselves up to the possibilities of what if. And as we go through this process of spirituality, it is the opportunity to build self-awareness and insight and understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe and how we all are connected. And I think a good way to connect to that ignorance and to relieve ourselves of that suffering is to confess our hidden faults, and we don't have to confess it to everyone. We just need to maybe identify it in ourselves. And then through that self-awareness, that insight and understanding of that thing that we kind of are revolted by in ourselves, maybe we can start to give ourselves some compassion and let that go and say, okay, that's all right. But we need to free ourselves of that ignorance. That's a bondage. And opening ourselves up to new thoughts and ideas, new experiences, and not thinking that our way is the only way. The second thought in the Kleshas is our suffering related to attachment. And Jen and I have talked about attachment before. We've tried to talk about it. It also connects to the idea of wrongful thinking, or that we're attached to someone or something. Maybe that's another human being. Maybe that's a teaching that's erroneous. Maybe that's a teaching that's connected to a person. Maybe we get lost in the person and devalue the message, or something along those lines. It's the idea of clinging and grasping onto things, people, ideas that we find pleasurable or desirous. And it creates a sense of craving and wanting, which can lead to negative emotions like greed and jealousy and obsession. And that attachment and that craving can cause us to be preoccupied with fulfilling our desires. And sometimes it's at the expense of others and our own well-being. And we need to take time to recognize and think about, what are we attaching ourselves to? And why do we do that? And once you recognize what you're attaching yourself to or holding on to so tightly, is finding a way to let it go, to release the strangled hold on that thing. And taking an opportunity to recognize the impermanent and almost unsatisfactory nature of things, and develop a sense of contentment and inner peace. And then you can break yourself of that cycle of always wanting to desire, always wanting to have, always wanting to hold on to. What's the point? Because our mind, the human condition, is limitless on the ideas of what it wants. Because once we have something, there's always something else behind it. There's always another thing to love or hold on to and crush. Because we want to hold it so tightly, there's always something else. And we have to learn to say, what I have is enough. Be content in that moment and let it go. The third obstacle in our journey is aversion or repulsion. It's almost the opposite of attachment. It's where we're turned away from or towards thoughts or people or ideas that we find unpleasant or undesirable. It creates, rejection, avoidance that can lead to more negative emotions like fear, anger, aggression. And we can we start to use those ways to, repulse ourselves. We become preoccupied with getting away from those things. And again, it's sometimes at the expense of others and our own well-being. We have to go into some of those dark places in our own lives to kind of free ourselves of that. And that's what we're talking about here. A lot of people don't want to, maybe interact with a homeless person because they're revolted by, their life, or they find them to be unclean or whatever. But, it's important for us to find compassion and maybe reach out to those places. Go to those things that we find difficult. Have a conversation. So if this homeless person, we don't know why they're homeless. We don't know who brought them to this state, but that doesn't mean that they're any less of a human than you are. And maybe what they really need is just somebody to acknowledge that they exist, and understanding that, as people on a spiritual path, we need to create and cultivate compassion and equanimity for everyone so that we can maybe help liberate them and ourselves. So thinking about those places that we really push away from, and maybe lean into those places a little bit. I'm not saying you rush into a burning building, but maybe you step a little closer so you can feel the heat on your skin, and understand that maybe there's some growth to be had by moving towards it a little bit. Ego is a big issue in our spiritual journey. We have this idea of this sense of superiority and arrogance that can lead to a distorted view of ourselves and others, and it creates separation from ourselves and distance from others, which can cause deep division and conflict. And then we sometimes, wrapped up in this pride, we can be preoccupied with our own interests and desires. I find ego to be one of the most challenging of all of these 5 kleshas. Not only for myself, but for my students. We live in a world where it is about, it seems like it's all about competition, like who can do this better, faster, more precise. And we get caught up in this competition of things, and it's painful. I see it a lot in a fast asana yoga class, where people of all experiences come to a class, and you'll have somebody who's the first class and somebody that's their 550th class. And the person who's shown up for the first class looks at the person that's been here for 550 classes and say, well, if they're doing it, I need to do it. And not really understanding that it took a long time to get to 550 classes for that person. And the person who shows up for the first time, they get disappointed, maybe never come back, because they're like, well, I'll never be able to do that. That's not what this is about. So turning your ego off, not letting it be the sole purpose of why you're showing up, like turning it off, turning it down, whatever that is. I've said many times in a class, leave your ego at the door, because sometimes it really gets in the way of things. And I'm talking from a spiritual standpoint, like it blocks your ability to open yourself up. Because we think, I already know this stuff. I already saw a YouTube video about whatever. So there's nothing more you can tell me. And that kind of feeds back to the idea of ignorance, right? Or aversion to something new, or an attachment to the wrong idea. The ego can play a really big part in undercutting our ability to connect to ourselves. I said in the blog post, and Jen laughed when she read it, was, you're not the center of the universe, so stop acting like it. The idea that you want to create humility and selflessness in order to attain spiritual liberation is on you, but you're the one in control of that. We think that the ego is one that's always driving the bus, but no, your hands are on the wheel, so you can turn that off. And it's important that we develop a sense of compassion and empathy towards others and ourselves, so that we can kind of break that cycle of letting the ego always drive the bus and lead us in the wrong place. Not all the time, but many times. Like, what was I really here for? and what did I learn along the way? So back to my story at the beginning about walking, what was really driving me forward towards the river? Was it my ego based on what I'd done time-wise to get to that point the day before? Or was it something else? Maybe it was a little bit of both. So it's important to kind of rein in the ego, be content where we are in that moment. And the last one of our roadblocks here is envy or possessiveness. This is tricky too. This is difficult for a lot of people, and I think it's even more difficult in modern society where the world is smaller, where social media plays a big part in our day-to-day lives, where we see our friends on social media posting stuff. They're doing great things. They're on vacation. They're planting trees. They're saving the world. They're teaching a yoga class. They're, making pottery. They're baking a cake, whatever that is. And we sometimes find ourselves being envious because we're only seeing the high points of their life, right? And seeing those high points, we start seeing together, well, their life is always great because they're always posting great stuff on social media. And my life is not that great. I never post anything on social media. And it becomes a distorted view of the world, right? So we become envious of that. And in that, we think that we lack the qualities we wish we had. And we start to develop some not great feelings of resentment and hostility towards ourselves and maybe others. Again, the human condition and the mind is always seeking something else if we allow it to. It always desires something more. And if we constantly compare ourselves to the people around us, we'll never be satisfied. We'll never be content because we're always chasing something else. And that comparison and competition can take us to places that are ugly emotionally. Anger and bitterness. And we can start to create some serious discontent and be preoccupied with the success or failure of others. And that's a negative spin cycle, which only will take us down. I think it's important to recognize those things around us, those people's successes, and celebrate them instead of undercutting them. Hey, if you made a beautiful cake today, if you feel inclined, say, hey, great job, and let it go. Not like, I got to go make a great cake and post it on social media. Just, acknowledge that, say what you need to say that makes, express gratitude and happiness for them. And by doing so, that releases some of that for you. But that's difficult, right? Creating gratitude and expressing gratitude for others is difficult sometimes when we're in a dark place. But we need to take that opportunity and be grateful and recognize the things and the opportunities in our own life and develop a sense of joy and appreciation towards the success of others. And in that, we can free ourselves from the cycle of suffering and start to create a state of contentment, lasting peace, knowing satisfaction, happiness, if that's what you want to work towards. All of these things that I spoke about today are challenging, and don't feel like you've got to conquer them all in one sitting. It's important to acknowledge them and realize that they may come singularly or they may come in clusters. We have complex emotions and see if you can start to pull them apart and see really where you really need to work. And there's nothing wrong with identifying what you need to work on And then once you're there, take some of these things that I discussed this morning and see if you can apply them to those feelings, those roadblocks. See if you can find a way around these things that are hindering your ability to move forward. But it only arrives through self-awareness. And it only continues if you allow it and lean into the process a bit. If you're constantly jumping out and going, this is too difficult, I want to do this, you'll be disappointed the more you kind of jump in and jump out, jump in and jump out. And I know Jen and I've talked about that many times on other episodes. Staying on the path, while it might be difficult, in the long run, the journey is enlightening, and what you find out about yourself is the most important part. So if you want to read more about Kleshas and the 5 poisons or obstacles in your spiritual journey, jump up to noexpectations.me. Check out the Freedom from the Bondage of Human Condition post. And again, there's really a lot of great posts up there, having a lot of contributors putting some great thoughts and ideas on the site. So check us out there. Make sure you follow us on social, No Expectations, the podcast, and make sure to like us and follow us. We appreciate it. I know Jen is missing today's episode, and I'm missing Jen, so hopefully she'll be back next week, and we'll jump back in, and I can hear her snarky voice in my head giving me trouble right now. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for listening to No Expectations, the podcast. We invite you to come join us and carry on the conversation at noexpectations.me, our new website, where we will be posting blog posts. We will link all of our episodes there, and you can follow us on our social media sites through the website.